my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I have a book talk video to share with you guys. It has been a hot minute since I've been able to sit down and actually film a book talk video, so I'm so excited to be here and doing it today. The book we are going to be talking about is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I picked up this book in the Dublin airport on the way home. I was reading a book on and off while I was there in Ireland, but I didn't have a ton of time to read. And the book that I was reading, I'm loving it. It's fantastic, but it's a little heavier. It's a little more of a difficult read. So at the airport I was like, I just want to get something that's a quick read. Maybe it's a little lighter. So this is what I picked up. I loved the cover. I loved the title. I loved that it was written by a Scottish writer. In the bookshop at the airport, they kind of had displays of like Irish writers, Scottish writers, UK writers, things like that. So I grabbed this from one of those displays. So let's just jump on into it. Eleanor Oliphant is a 30-year-old woman, but she's a little different than your average person. The way she speaks is different. She speaks as though she's from another time. She wears the same clothes every day. She eats the same thing for lunch every day. She works in a graphic design office, but she doesn't work on the creative side. She works more on the business side. She doesn't really get along with any of her coworkers. It's not that she actively, doesn't like them. It's just that where she's so different, they've never really connected. And they talk about her behind her back and about how weird she is. And sometimes she hears them and she never says anything. She just waits until they're done talking and then enters the room, or whatever the case may be. So as it starts off, we don't know why Eleanor is the way she is. We also quickly learn that she's got a scar on the side of her face. Like almost one whole side of her face is scarred from burns. But again, at first we don't know how she got the burns or why or anything like that. So right at the beginning, Eleanor and one of her co-workers end up going to a concert together because through some inter-office thing they won the tickets. And so they go, and Eleanor is getting ready to watch the opening act. And he comes out, the lead singer, and she's instantly taken with him. She knows nothing about him, just what she can see. And she, on the spot, decides that finally there's someone who she could be interested in. And she leaves the concert after his set. And her coworker, this just adds fuel to the weirdo fire that her coworkers feel about her, because the next day he goes in and he's like, we were at the concert and she just left. Like, it's so weird. So after that, Eleanor becomes obsessed with this frontman from the band. His name is Johnny. After work one day, she goes to an electronics store and she buys a computer because she doesn't have one in her home. Gets the internet hooked up. She eventually even gets a smartphone just so she can follow him on Twitter, creep him on Facebook, things like that. She doesn't learn a whole lot about him through that because, of course, he's just putting up random tweets or Facebook statuses. But still, she's determined that she's in love with him. So that in and of itself is quite strange. So throughout the course of the passing of days, we meet Raymond, and we meet him as Eleanor runs into him one day outside of work. He works in the same building, not in the same business, but the same building. And he's kind of like, oh, hey, Eleanor, how's it going? He's being very nice to her, which is something that nobody else in the building has done. But she just brushes him off. She's like, this guy, not interested in even talking to this guy. Get away from me. And as you're reading it, you're like, oh, okay, Eleanor, settle down. And they keep bumping into each other every so often. And then one day when they're out, a man collapses in the street. And the two of them, they go over to this man, and Raymond sort of gets down on his knees and he throws his phone to Eleanor and he says, call 911. And so Raymond's sort of tending to the man as he's laying on the floor. And the act of Raymond throwing her this phone and telling her to call 911 triggers something in her, and she's kind of freaking out, and she's like, no, I can't call 911. I'll sit with the guy, you call 911. And you kind of get the feeling that it has something to do with the fire that burned her. And so 911 comes and they take the man away, and Eleanor is left holding the man's bags because he had been grocery shopping. So she takes the bags. Raymond goes in the ambulance with the man that had collapsed. And later that night, Raymond calls her and he's like, hey, I'm still at the hospital with the man, and if you'd like to bring his groceries by, I'm sure he'd love to see you and he could talk to us and we could sort of piece together for him what we saw happen at the site of the accident. So at first she's kind of like, no, I'm not really interested in that. Thanks, Raymond. But after a bit, she's like, okay, yes, I will. I'll come over and I'll bring him the things that from the bag that won't go bad, because at this point, the man is unconscious still. But by the time she gets to the hospital, he's woken up and they sort of piece it all together. And the man sort of asks like, oh, you two, it's so nice to see young married couples helping people. And she was like, oh, no, we're not married. I'm involved with someone else. And of course she's referring to the musician that she hasn't met, that she just saw in concert. And it's weird. It's weird. But Eleanor's weird, so it's all kind of par for the course. So then over time, we start to see Eleanor talking to her mother on the phone. We get glimpses at those conversations, and they're really unsettling. Because Eleanor's mom, who she calls mommy, even though she's 30 years old, and just the way she uses the word mommy, it's very unsettling. And her mom is just brutal to her. When she talks to Eleanor, she just drags her, makes her feel incompetent, knocks down her self-confidence, makes her feel like she's worthless. And then Eleanor hangs up and then goes about the rest of her week until Wednesday rolls around and it's time to talk to her mom again. So time goes on, and through little bits and pieces, Eleanor and Raymond are getting to know each other more. Like they both go and visit the man in the hospital pretty much every day. And then one day while they're there, and Raymond says like, hey, I'm gonna go visit my mom. Why don't you come with me? Because Raymond can tell that Eleanor is a very lonely soul. He can just see it and feel it, how lonely she is. There's a part in him that's also a bit of a loner, and that kind of draws him to Eleanor, and he likes her. He thinks her quirky personality is funny, and he thinks she's a good person, even though she obviously has walls and layers up guarding herself. So he keeps reaching out, and he'll invite her to lunch at work, which she accepts, and they just start spending more time together, and they start to form a really solid friendship. And there's at one point where he says to her, you can tell me anything, we're friends. And that really moves her because no one has ever said that to her before. No one. She's been in and out of foster homes her entire life, or for a lot of her life, from like 9 or 10 onwards. And she hasn't had a friend, a true friend who wanted nothing from her, who just wanted friendship. So it's really fun getting to watch this relationship blossom. So over time, the man from the hospital is about to get released, and his family is all there, and they're all thanking Eleanor and Raymond, of course, for helping him when he was having his moment of trouble. And they tell Eleanor and Raymond that there's going to be a welcome home party or get better soon party, and they want them to come. So Eleanor and Raymond, of course, accept, and a few days later it's time for the party, and they go. And one thing about Eleanor is she drinks a lot. You know, Monday to Friday she's at work, she's focused, and then on Friday evening on the way home from work, she stops at the local Tesco and she picks up 3 large bottles of vodka that she drinks throughout the weekend. Like, basically she makes it so that at no point between Friday night and Monday morning is she, or Friday night and Sunday night we'll say, is she sober. She's just constantly got a bit of a buzz going, just so that she doesn't have to spend too much time in her own mind. And so they go to the party, they have a few drinks, you know, they're having a good time. Eleanor starts to notice that Raymond is sort of hitting it off with Laura, which is the man's daughter. And Eleanor likes that, and then at a later date she asks him about it, and he's like, yeah, you know, Laura's nice, but she's not really my type. She's a little too high maintenance. And so Eleanor's like, oh, well, that's too bad. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, she is still keeping track of her musician imaginary boyfriend, and she's getting ready to go and see him in concert. And she decides that she wants to buy some nice clothes, because like I said at the beginning, she wears the same clothes every day, the same shoes, the same everything. So she goes, and the lady at the store sort of helps her, dresses her up, and Eleanor really likes it. She feels like she looks younger than she has in years. And then eventually Laura, the daughter of the man, she's a hairstylist, and she helps Eleanor and gets her a new hairstyle and everything like that. And with that, Eleanor gains a bit of confidence. And then the night of the concert comes, and it doesn't work out the way Eleanor had in mind, as I'm sure you can imagine. He gets up and he's performing, and he's being crass, and he's being loud and obnoxious, just all the things that Eleanor really doesn't appreciate. And as we've learned throughout the story, Eleanor in her life, she's had one boyfriend, and that was when she was in college, and he was extremely, extremely abusive, and he would punch her and break her bones. And she, honestly, because of her upbringing and her history, she didn't know that that wasn't okay. And eventually she ends up in the hospital, very beaten, and the nurse tells her, like, this is not okay. And Eleanor's kind of like, really? And that's what it takes for her. Like, she gets rid of him, she changes the locks, all that. And yeah, so when she's seeing Johnny perform, she's just not liking his personality. And that sort of sends her into this snowball of depression and anxiety. And then the next thing we know, the next thing we see, is a section of the book called Bad Days begins. So the first part was called Good Days, and that's what we've read so far. And then the second part is called Bad Days. And I think I'm going to give you a warning now. If you don't want any spoilers, click out, don't watch anymore, get out of here. And for the rest of you who'd like to hear how it ends, let's get on into it. So she wakes up. She's laying on the floor, very drunk. She doesn't know how she got there. She doesn't know what happened. She passes back out. She wakes up the next time, and Raymond is there, and he has put her in bed, and he's sort of sitting on the edge of the bed, and he is like, Eleanor, what in the sweet name of God is going on here? He's like, I need you to break this down for me and tell me what is up with you. So she tells him a little bit, but not much. She mentions her mom briefly. Her mom's not something she likes to talk about. And she sort of expresses to Raymond that maybe she should stop talking to her mom. Like, her mom is not helping her in any way, shape, or form. And, you know, she says for years she hung on to her because, you know, it's her mom. But when someone is so toxic, you eventually have to do something, or you're putting your own well-being at risk for the sake of being polite to someone who doesn't care. So eventually Raymond manages to convince Eleanor that she has a problem and she should probably see a doctor about it. And she does. She goes and she sees the therapist, and she gets like a medical leave from work so that she can stay home and kind of deal with what she's going through. And the doctor starts trying to lead her into deeper places where she can find out what is at the core of these problems. Why Eleanor is drinking so much to the point of blackouts and all weekend long. What is it? What is it? So it takes time. It takes a lot of time for the therapist to be able to get her to feel safe enough to open up. So at first, you know, the first thing that she sort of reveals is that she has a sister, or rather she had a sister. And then through time we learn that why Eleanor has so many scars on her face and why her sister is no longer with her is that there was a house fire when they were young, and it was a fire that was intentionally started by Eleanor's mom with the intent to kill both of the children. But Eleanor made it out, but her sister Marianne did not. So that was a pretty painful revelation. But even with that, she's still not ready to talk to the therapist about her mother yet. And the therapist is like, you know, that's okay. We'll get there. You're doing great. And Eleanor's like, okay. So as all this is going on, she's still spending a lot of time with Raymond. Raymond has really stepped up, and he is just a true friend to her. And she appreciates it so much. And he tells her one day when they're together, he says, you know what, Eleanor, I've looked you up. Like, I've Googled you. I Googled the fire and everything that happened. And he said, in this envelope, he's holding this like brown envelope. He says, in this envelope, I've printed it all out. And if you want to read it, you can. And she's kind of like, nope, not interested. And he's like, okay, that's fine. And then back to the therapist, you know, Eleanor mentions that she wants to stop speaking to her mom every Wednesday because she's finding it toxic and hurtful. And the therapist is sort of like, yeah, I think that's a good idea. That's a great idea. And even earlier in the book, when Eleanor was younger and she's dealing with a social worker after she leaves the foster system and she moves into her own apartment to go to college, she mentions her mom, and the social worker says, oh, you're still talking to her, okay. And that, you know, that's a weird reaction. And so the final reveal is that Eleanor's mom died in the fire as well. So she hasn't been talking to her mom every Wednesday. She's been sort of talking to herself, hallucinating it, whatever you want to do, because she had to. That, you know, when trauma is so deep, you find ways to keep yourself sane. And even though that was a toxic and hurtful way, that's the way she found to deal with it. Now, I will say I called that very early on, especially when that first caseworker said, oh, you're still talking to her. Like, just the way it was all worded, the vibes I got from it, I knew right away that her mom was dead, and she wasn't actually talking to her. So I don't know. On the front here it says, there's a quote from someone. It says, funny, touching, and unpredictable. So I would say it was definitely funny. It was definitely touching, but unpredictable, I did not find it to be. You know, there was no points that shocked me. I knew very early on that her mom was dead. So yeah, I wouldn't call it unpredictable, but I would say I enjoyed it a lot. I really came to love Eleanor Oliphant, even with all of her, you know, weirdness. Oh, and one other thing I do want to mention is when she was off work on leave, she was off for 2 months, and during that time, one day she got a delivery, and it was a large bouquet of flowers from her boss at work, and all the people in the office had signed it. And I loved that. That made me happy that that happened, because I knew her boss. Her boss always had a soft spot for her. And of course those people only signed the card because they were probably told to, but just the Just the thought from her boss, I really liked that, and she really appreciated it too. So yes, I loved this. The book kind of ends in terms of Eleanor and Raymond. It never develops into a romance, but at the very end you kind of get the feeling that it might, and even if it doesn't, that's okay. You know, they're best friends, and not every relationship has to turn into romance. But maybe it will, and I think he would be so good for her, and her for him. So yes, that was Eleanor Oliphant. It's completely fine, and would recommend. I would probably give it a 4 out of 5 stars, even though I found it, that sort of final twist ending, predictable. It was still really well written. I think the characters are all very well developed, and it's a fun story, even though there's sadness there, you know, like her mother tried to kill her in a fire. It seems a little weird calling a book with that sort of material fun, but it still is fun, even though it gets, you know, it's sad at parts, but it's still fun. So there you go. Have you read this book? If you did you like it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I heard recently that Reese Witherspoon has bought the rights to this and she's turning it into a movie. I feel like Reese Witherspoon is all over the place buying rights to books. What's that about? I think it's cool. I think it's great, but I didn't know that was her thing, but apparently it is now. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, you guys. Hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Bye.